Hello, friends, and welcome to Bible study. We're in the NIV, and actually, for the first time ever, I'm going to read to you first from the Old Testament. And then I'm going to pick up where I left off in the New Testament, in 2 Corinthians. It's just what's in 2 Corinthians. It's just another one of those places that me and Paul don't really agree. So we're going to get our spirit lesson from the Old Testament today. And then we'll talk about, after I read you that part in 2 Corinthians, why I don't quite agree with him. I mean, he's not wrong. I just also don't like his tactic. Or it's the wording that is the problem for me. So we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 10. And we are going to go from 4 to 14. Okay, because this is just... so this whole thing is under the premise that it's written by King Solomon. Now, if it's not King Solomon, it's somebody writing as if they are King Solomon. Like as if they were looking at King Solomon's life and summarizing the thoughts that might be in his head. This would also, from the way this is written, indicate that this is towards the end of Solomon's life. And remember that Solomon was the king of kings during his day. I mean, he had everything. I mean, King David was his father. His father helped him design the temple. That's why it could, look that way and be like that. He'd already started to gather the resources needed for him, and then he could gather the rest of the resources. He had, princess. He had queens from all over, the most beautiful women in the world, from all over the world as his wives, plus a bunch of concubines. He had like 1,000 women. I mean, so he had everything. And when he did all of that worship in the whole beginning, before he ever, all of the rest of that thing, and God came to him, the only thing he asked for was discernment, so he could be a good king. Now he proceeded to do bunches of things and fall. So this would be after he had fallen, after he had learned a bunch of harsh lessons and all that kind of stuff. But, he had asked for discernment. So, and in some of this, in reading this, it almost explains some of the stuff. Think of it almost like if you're like a Star Wars fan like I am, think of it how the Clone Wars cartoon show explains how Anakin got from, I love my wife so much, to sure, I'll slaughter some 6-year-olds to keep her alive. I mean, that's, what? I mean, because that just, wait a minute, what? But it wasn't that fast. There were years and years in war in between. He was a young man in the second movie, and by the time you get to the third movie, he's actually, seasoned because he's been at war. They're in the middle of a war that they didn't explain in between in any of those movies. Bless you, Kasha. So, this would be like the equivalent of the difference in aging and what did you learn with this wisdom, because it never said God took away his wisdom. It just meant what he was doing, he knew what he was doing. He wasn't tricked. That just makes the insult bigger. So, chapter 10, verse 4. If a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great errors to rest. So not giving somebody back an emotional reaction when they are angry sort of diffuses the whole situation, because your calmness does nothing. And I can't tell you how many times for me, having something to focus on and do when I was in some state of mental or emotional distress where I needed to focus on it and do it. So it was like, no, you don't have time for that right now, kind of thing. How much that helps calm the emotions. So then you can come back and look at whatever it is from a cooler head and learn a lesson from it so you don't repeat the mistake. And besides, if you're like, I'm sorry, you're right, I'm sorry, how can I do that better? What do I need to be doing instead? You'll often find that your bosses are just like, oh, I don't need to stay angry with you. Let's talk about the solution. And that's much healthier. Talking about the solution is healthy. Verse 5. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sorts of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback while princes go on foot like slaves. So, having people, no matter how good they are, in the wrong positions of power in your life or in the world or anywhere else is a problem. And this is true. This is still true today. It's true when he wrote it. It's been true since the beginning of time. And if you want to look for it, if you consistently go look at like the kings in Europe, and you look at the ones that were like, oh my, like what happened here? What happened to this country during this time to that time? You're going to probably go in and find that is the second son that was ruling. Why? Because they were never trained how to rule. The first sons were actually put into a tutelage of how to rule a country, how to run a government, how to play in the politics, how to do those things. It's a skill. Being a leader is a skill. You're not actually just born into it. No, it's a choice. Because to be a leader is not just to have power or to wield it or to be able to be dominating or controlling. That's not what a leader is. A leader knows when they don't know something and when they know they need to go listen to other people. But you need to be listening to the right people. He's talking about those people where it's all over the Old Testament where it's like, oh, here's my signet ring. Do whatever you think is best. Well, then that's a problem. Listening to them and then making a decision. That's the normal cycle if one is a leader. Understanding that it's still your responsibility to make the decision and knowing when and where and who to give that position of power to is essential in everybody's life, whether you're a leader or you're not. But they wouldn't educate the second sons because of the superstition that they're cursing the first sons to failure then. Instead of just educating all of the children the same, which is very much so what we do now. Your children are in a public or private school. They're getting the same education as everybody else sitting in the room, unless they have special needs, in which case they get extra help because they need extra help so the teacher can keep teaching the multitude of children that are in the room. Now, I've got all kinds of opinions on that because I'm very pro-teacher. It's a bureaucracy like anything else. We had to come to there. These kinds of things, they weren't taught. There was no public education at the time that these things were written. That was an America thing. I mean, it did start in Europe around the exact same time. So it's like a part of the world thing, with some countries getting into it earlier rather than later. But you're still talking like 1700s, 1800s, depending upon what country you're in. So just think about that for a minute. You knew whatever your parents taught you, and that was the only source of education you had because you didn't have a school to go to. And then all of a sudden the rest of the world starts making more sense, right? Verse 8, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall might be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs might be endangered by them. Life is full of risk. Every profession, everything that you can do has risk in it. It's just a matter of what you consider is worth the risk. Calculated risk. Now, in the business world, risk is absolutely a very high subject matter because analyzing that risk and making the right decisions behind the risk, the reality that you can't get rid of risk. There's some risks you can mitigate. Some risks you can protect yourself with, let's say like insurances and things like that, where it's smart to have those types of things in case you go wrong. So that's what most insurances are. It's good to have backup plans and contingency plans, but there's some risks you just have to accept. And they're just there. And there's nothing you can do about them. And you have to get to that place where you understand that. And what you do is, instead of trying to pretend that like there's not a danger, is you analyze the danger and you place the protections you can place, and then you just see what happens. Because it's like, and I'm a planner and an overdoer and a worrier. So trust me, if I can make a contingency plan for it, I will sit down and do it. I am very much so the person that you come to when you're like, I have this weird problem. Well, have you tried this strange thing? Because I had this strange experience. My life is full of, you're not going to believe that, stories. Like, I don't drink beer anymore, but I will sit and, I don't have a problem being around other people who drink. So I will happily sit in a bar, snack on some, bar foods and drink it, whatever beverage suits me in that moment and tell you stories, because I don't need any alcohol to make that happen. But I've got a lot of weird stories because life is full of risk, and I've never really been afraid of risk. So I can't, I wasn't really born with a spirit of fear. I just also wasn't born a dumbass either. And that's what you're doing when you make contingency plans and you have things. But then you let go because you've planned for everything that you can. And then you just see what happens. Because sometimes people in situations surprise you. I love that. Verse 10. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed. But skill, like sharpen the axe, will bring success. Don't have to use more force than necessary. You don't need to do it with brute force. Very few things require brute force. Being clever is better. Right? Mechanical engineering has a whole big study on that. It's all sorts of leverage. And it's really about the right use of tools. Use the right tool to do the job. Don't use a hammer when you need a screwdriver. Right? Verse 11. If a snake bites before it is charmed, there is no profit for the charmer. So, well, you do have to have some skill in what you're doing, because who wants to pay for a snake charmer who gets bit by the snakes? That's not what you're paying them for. So, that's not the show. Don't go so risky. Don't go too big. Don't go too broad that, you're taking a risk of ruining something consistent in your long-term plans. Think about your long-term and what you're trying to achieve before you take actions. Verse 12. Words from a wise man's mouth are gracious, but a fool is consumed by his own lips. At the beginning, his words are folly. At the end, they are wicked madness. And the fool multiplies words. So they don't know when to stop talking and just keep talking. No one knows what is coming. Who can tell him what will happen after him? So this whole thing, some of it is a little bit bitter. But sometimes life is a little bit bitter. So it doesn't do us any harm to really examine that. You can tell when other people, this is to me is a warning about confirmation bias. You can tell when you can tell better when you're way off target if you have to explain it to somebody else. Sit there. I do that all the time when I'm trying to sort through, because I've got generalized anxiety disorder and a bunch of other stuff. So if I want to sort through whether or not something is just complete nonsense or it's worthwhile or something to concern myself with, I sit there and think through the process of having to explain it to another person. And if it's something I can't explain out loud to another person without sounding like I'm insane, if somebody said that to me when I think they were crazy, then I know it's the anxiety. Discernment is a beautiful friend. Okay, so 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 15. This is called Generosity Encouraged. Remember, this is from Paul, the beginning parts of the church. We're talking about, late 50s, early 60s AD. Verse 1. And now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and then and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing this service to the saints. That's the church back in Jerusalem. And they did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, then to us, in keeping with God's will. So we urge Titus, since he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also completion this act of grace on your part. But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, or in our love for you in some manuscripts, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I am not commanding you, but I want you to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty might become rich, so that you through his poverty might become rich. And here is my advice about what is best for you in this matter. Last year, you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Our desire is not for others, that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. Then there will be equality, as it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Yeah, I know, I read that all the way through without stopping. So he's talking about tithing, and yes, equality is beautiful, and yes, tithing does work. This is also an important reminder that Paul is a Pharisee. Paul was a human, and he himself was flawed. Yes, he is indeed comparing the churches based upon their generosity of donating money, because to the Pharisees in the Jewish temple, that was a measure of your worth. That is where it comes from. That's why it's still prevalent in our society. Yes, you still see this reflected in the Catholic Church. Yes, the Catholic Church does indeed work this way. Every church does work on tithing, regardless, Catholic, temple, I don't care, all of them. They all work on tithing. And it's intended to not put the burden unduly on any one that time, the Old Testament time, tribe. Because the Levites were not allowed to have land, so they couldn't earn profit. How are they supposed to upkeep the temple? How are they supposed to feed themselves? That's why that existed. It is also why it exists within the Catholic Church. So I'm not saying they shouldn't collect tithes. They do have a process of allocating funds, and if one of their churches does not have enough funds for often enough, they will close down a parish. I mean, there is the practical side of the maintenance of things. And that is what the tithing is supposed to go to. And anything extra from that, beyond taking care of the church and, your minister and their, in the priesthood, the nuns and the priests, and then, for the Catholics, but in the Protestants, the minister and their family, because if they're married and have children and stuff, those people need to be fed and all that stuff too, just like it would have been with the Levites. Okay, so all this is established from the Old Testament. So again, that's why it's relevant with Paul and the Pharisees, because this is what he knows. So this is what he would preach. And it's not wrong. You should give generously from heart because you want to. But it's also a reminder that every kind of job has a certain amount of hustle and flow in it. So if you say you don't like sales, it really is everywhere, and it's been everywhere since the beginning. The things that I have come to find that it is very, very important that if you're going to do that, you have to really believe what it is that you're preaching, what it is you're selling, because people can tell. The Holy Spirit lights you up when you talk about it, right? So you can obviously see how I feel about this. It's valid and it's necessary. I just also don't like to focus on it because it's not the work. That's not the work I want to do. That's not the work I want to do ever, really. I understand it. My stance has always been to follow the Jesus path, which is what made him the Messiah was the fact that he had his head down, doing the work, being who he was supposed to be, and not being afraid to be who that is, which is much more in line with what you're getting from Ecclesiastes today. Because in the end, he has, in one of the further ones that I didn't go to, you have to get into chapter 12 for that, which I encourage you to read that whole book. Just remember, salty old man writing. So if there's some bitterness in there, maybe don't absorb that so much. The words of the wise are used to move people forward. The reality is, and that's the start of chapter 10, he does go through and say that, Solomon, that the reality is throughout time, the hearts of humans have remained very much the same. Our bodily needs haven't changed. How we go about getting them has. Our emotional needs, our feelings, what we have is a better understanding about how we're supposed to interact with others. So we're a little less like a 2-year-old and a little bit more, well, I don't know that we're all out of kindergarten. Some of us might be in like 2nd grade. And there are other people who are still working on kindergarten. Those ones who forgot that you're supposed to play nice with others. Intentionally. Like by default. Those people. So they might still be in preschool. Okay? It's not like we're real advanced. Let's not give ourselves too much credit. I mean, and the fact that I say that is probably how you can tell I'm a Protestant. Because that's kind of what it is. And yeah, a little evangelical. It was there from the beginning. In fact, when I was young, I was put into this club. And when I say young, I mean like kindergarten. It was called the Awanas, and that club was called the Sparks. And what that really is training children to be ministers, to speak the word of God to other children. So yes, I was actually always just like this. That's my subconscious mind is 6 years old. That's what I say. She's the same person. She got preacher training at 6 years old. That's why it comes as second nature to me. The words of the wise are used to move us forward. We're supposed to remember them and speak them and just use them to help us move forward. We're not supposed to whole scale just do everything that person did in their life. You have to find a way to make what they did, the attitude of what they did, the heart of what they did, the action of what they did, apply to your everyday situation. That is your challenge. No one else is supposed to do that for you. It's there because humans haven't really changed all that much. We just act a little less crappy to each other. We're a lot less crappy. I think a lot less crappy. But then I'm an optimist. Sister Hope, if I was going to have one of those kinds of names.